So we have Andrew on here. Andrew is the creator of Curved Space, which is currently on Steam. He is an experienced Unity developer, 20 years of experience doing game dev, and he's also got experience in enterprise and VR enterprise applications. He's got a plethora of knowledge and quite a few stories to share with us. Unfortunately, he doesn't have a web camera, so I'm going to be doing a lot of screen sharing on here, and we're going to be able to hear him talking. If you guys do have questions while we're doing this, please feel free to type it into the chat. And other than that, Andrew, how about you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Hi, welcome. Thank you for having me, and big fan of your Best of Unity series. So this is quite the honor, and yeah, I've seen so much stuff over my career so far. I love game dev. I love the technology and the people and all of this, and it's just been a blast. And I've got lots of stories, and I'm happy to share.
Awesome, awesome. So Andrew, give me an idea. Tell me, how did you start in this industry?
So the back in grade four, it's actually funny. My teacher there told my mom she predicted I'd be illustrating biology textbooks because it's a mix of art and science. So
Mhm.
first, what does that start to sound like for art and science? Like that's a pretty clear trajectory onto the whole game side. Did a whole bunch of modding through high school on Unreal Tournament, especially, and those sort of pieces. And then, I think this would have been around 2004 or something like that. On the Unreal mod boards, someone had posted, it's like, looking for someone to do like X, Y, and Z, will pay. And it's funny because they got flamed out of that board. It's like, this isn't the recruitment channel, you idiot. And meanwhile, I'm looking at that going, I could use a job and I know how to do those things. Let's see what happens. And that was actually with the former lead animator, senior producer, and I can't remember the other role, but off just fresh off Halo 1. And so I had some ex-Bungie guys and got involved there. We did some prototypes and all sorts of crazy stuff. I went to university expecting to be working at BioWare. That was sort of the get degree, move over to BioWare. In the middle of that, ended up co-founding a company that became Serious Labs. Worked there for a little over 15 years. That went from a spare computer in my parents' basement to 70 people downtown, big office, some major global customers. Had some amazing project stories there, and more recently, the little hobby project that I was tinkering away with in the background with my wife. It started to grow roots, turn into something real, and we founded Only by Midnight as kind of a vehicle for that IP. And when COVID hit and the world all exploded, the sabbatical I was planning on taking from Serious Labs turned into something a lot more real. It's like, okay, let's try this indie thing and put all the technical skills and business experience in these things to the test. And we've since we got a publishing deal, launched Curve Space on all platforms, so Nintendo Switch, Xbox, PlayStation, PC, GOG, and we're currently trying to figure out what comes next. We've done some prototype work. We have our new project prototype Tragic Kingdom there, and are kind of in that pitching funding stage for the next project, and onwards and upwards.
Awesome. So give me an idea with let's start over here with Serious Labs. So what was Serious Labs aimed at? Because this is something that we don't usually see too often. We talk to game developers that jump right into game development. Serious Labs is a VR developer, and it looks specifically aimed toward the enterprise industry. Is that correct?
Yeah, big time. It's funny. The early business plan at the very beginning is game technology cool, question mark, question mark, question mark, profit. So it was pretty damn half baked at the beginning. But the big idea is, how can we leverage this awesome game tech for business, and especially during those days, like the uh virtual reality in quotes. I don't mean headset virtual reality. I basically mean like real-time rendering, not for games. It was atrocious. It was awful. And meanwhile, you have like this like, I remember there was at the university this fancy SGI cave, and it was so cool and all these things. And it's like, it had 16 megabytes of memory, and it was $1 million. And meanwhile, in my backpack, I had a laptop with a gigabyte video memory, right? Like it's one of these like the technology from games had advanced so far ahead of kind of like the academic and business side. It's like, how can we really make use of this? And we did a bunch of experimentation, really tried to find our way. We created a a light mapping solution that allowed us to do really high end architectural previs rendering. We did that for home builders and some really interesting architectural projects, and we got really good at making realistic environments. And then the question came from actually Hertz Industrial Rental, and it's like, can you make a realistic job site just for illustrative purposes? But it's like, yeah, we can. And can you put a boom lift into that environment? Sure. And I did tack together some boom lift physics, and it's like, yeah, this is kind of something. But then you realize, wait a sec, this can't be better than like stuff that's already on the market. What does that say about the market? And we refined that further. We heavily got into the R&D. We worked with JLG, Genie, eventually Caterpillar in the U.S. Army, and we ended up doing some really neat projects. And that kind of, you start to see where that got into. We got into mining and oil field stuff. Our new projects are mostly like there's some really cool things, but my big focus was on VR crane, and that was with our partner ITI. And so that was a series of crane sims, including like our overhead crane here. You can see there the 300-ton crane that's lifting a giant bucket of lava. We did a big construction crane, like the giant construction cranes, the relatively small mobile cranes, tower crane. All that's really cool. Customers there like United Rentals, Bechtel, like these are Fortune 50 companies, right? And so we did some really fun stuff there, and they're still going strong. It's just somewhere along the way, it's like, you know what? The energy spiders are just a lot of fun, and especially me working with my wife. And so, you know what? We've thoroughly enjoyed the indie space, but there we go.
So when you guys made these VR simulations, you had the VR headsets, and you had them actually sit in these, I guess it looks like cockpit kind of simulations, and they actually had to run everything correctly, and then you dock their pay if they messed up on the simulation.
Yeah, you need the physical control surfaces because the actual dexterity, especially for crane, is really important.
Mm-hmm.
But if you look at like that desktop simulator, so you take a challenge of, say, you're trying to hire a whole bunch of crane operators, and for this big project, and you're trying to bring people internationally, right? And so you have this guy in, say, middle of nowhere Indonesia who says he's a crane operator. What do you do? Where do you ship them to and rent a crane? And these things are like hundreds of dollars an hour to like, it gets really expensive to verify that this guy actually can do something.
Mm-hmm.
Or if you show up with a briefcase, you can do it. And then the other side is like, you need to have there's a lot of science in terms of getting the simulation accurate enough, strong enough that you can use it for training or competency validation. And the big accomplishment we had with VR Crane just before I kind of faded out of that project was we did a big formal psychometric study as part of the validating competency, validating that we passing the NCCCO, the National Certification for Crane Operators test on the sim, was predictive of passing the same test in real life.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Where that matters is you start to get into the realm of now like certification, like for flight sims. Legally, an hour in a flight sim is equivalent to an hour in a 747. You
Wow.
can get your certification in a simulator. So that's the level we got to, where it's a that these studies, all that science, all that proof, the level of fidelity in that simulation, it's a you could now take basically a briefcase out there and certify someone as a crane operator without needing to wrangle a crane, which for some of these, like they can be small little crane is fine, but you talk about like a giant tower crane, that's not something you just have laying around, right?
Yeah.
And so yeah, it's funny, they hack together boom lift at the very beginning compared to like a I'd say world class high fidelity simulator. Like there's quite the journey in between, and
Mm-hmm.
probably about 12 years of heavy R&D. But yeah, we made some pretty cool stuff.
And you know, when you mention it like that, and you look at these prices and you say, well, I could actually have a giant insurance risk right now with putting someone on a crane who says they can do something, or I could pay the subscription and try to get as many people on the simulator as possible and highly qualified, so I don't get sued or thrown out of the industry. These prices don't look intimidating at all, especially from when we're talking about top 50 industries doing construction.
Yeah, when you start thinking about the cost of operating some of these things, it's huge. Like one of the numbers that blows my mind for the big mining industry, like that one of those big shovels, like
Mhm.
that thing's operating at $100,000 an hour. So
Oh
if
my
it's
God.
down, that's how much they're losing per
Oh
hour of it
goodness.
being down, right? So and like training on some of these can be very tough, and not just like it's funny. Like my dad's answer from industry is kind of like, you want to train the guy on the JLG, just take him out in the back and give him the keys to the JLG. But it's a consistent training that can be really optimized training with data,
Mhm.
as well as like for the mobile work platforms, like to get the PAL Plus certification. Now, this is, you need a specialized course with a specialized instructor at specialized training centers. This is not just, and plus it's 1,000 British pounds to take that course or take that test, but you're now traveling or sending someone hundreds of miles and booking time and all these things. Like it adds up really, really quickly. And it's
Mhm.
like, if you could have that in a briefcase and you set it up and have someone do that test and get it to the point that you can prove that doing that test is equivalent to the real one, like in the ways that matter. Yeah, there's something there. Like the business side is really, really fascinating. The challenging part is like any sort of entrepreneurial thing, it's a, you're trying to disrupt this industry at the same time as make something engaging, make something high quality with the physics and that. So there's a technical challenge, there's a production challenge, there's the trying to disrupt this industry, there's all sorts of politics and people who don't really want that industry to be disrupted. There's it gets complicated all around, right? So that's this isn't, yeah, the game technology is cool, therefore business. We had some really, really, really good guys working on the business side and making that all happen.
Wow. Now you guys are using, I'm assuming Oculus to run all these simulations
Uh,
as your headset, or was it the Vive, or was it something else?
yeah, Oculus was my preference for a bunch of that. Although I think, I don't know if they switched to Rift S or it's on Vive. It is headset agnostic.
Okay, perfect. Awesome. That is absolutely fantastic. And I mean, what an incredible industry to have been a part of. And then you mentioned that at a certain point, COVID came around and you were going to go on sabbatical and you've had this idea for curved space. Now tell me how this came about real quick.
So I had a kind of an idea planted in the back of my head. It turned into something radically different, as ideas do, but mutated quite a bit. But the like when we were working with the architectural visualization on light mapping, spent a lot of time thinking about encoding interesting information onto surfaces, and I just had that idea of like some sort of cool gameplay on a surface, and so poked at that a few times. It's funny, you look back at some of these prototypes and you can see the resonance with like the actual final product, but it's also very clear I didn't know what I was doing. It was impossible when I first poked at it in like 2012 and impossible in 2016 and these things. And it was only in the 2019 I had a whole pile of loo time saved up. They didn't want to pay me for some overtime crunch and or pay me out for that. So it's like, how would you like Friday? And it's like, sure, like Fridays for a year. So I had all this time, and it's like, let's pick up that old prototype project. And now I actually had the design and technology chops to actually make something happen, and we found the fun. We found something that was engaging. We started building that out, and or I started building that out, and it's funny. Like I had this sort of arcade action on a surface that I was really happy with, and my gave my wife a shot to play it, and her answer is like, "This is neat, but like, what are we shooting, and why are we shooting it?" And it's like, well, I don't know. And she goes, "You know
Why
what we need? You need transtemporal space spiders." And it's like, "Oh, tell me more." And you can see the influence there. And she was between jobs and had a background in science fiction, fantasy writing, editing, and that sort of stuff. And it was really fun to work with her. And then we folded in some of my friends who I've worked with. A good buddy of mine, Jerry Ricard, helped make some of the environment art, which has been great. And then once the project started getting traction, we had some awesome uh, like Dan, we met through Discord. Like his feedback on this has been just awesome and inspiring, and so there's a lot of people who've had their fingers involved on this project, but primarily it's me experimenting with topological arcade action and Jen coming in with transtemporal space spiders.
So, okay, looking at this, I see just a lot of crazy physics going on. I see a lot of crazy physics with, usually you have a capsule collider and you're shifting it along and you move too far off and you fall off gravity wise. But I see, weapons smoothly cascading over, bent and angular ground pieces, and I can't tell if these are modular elements or are they all created in Maya and brought in as one piece with tiled textures. Like give me an idea of what the concept was to come about to something like this.
Ooh, there's lots of different layers there. There's yeah, it's not very heavy on the capsule colliders. That's the problem. A lot of these ones, it's like there's this is very custom. But yeah, here let me just see. There's a couple of links that I think will help explain some of what we have. So here, this is kind of a good one to start, and chat. So just gonna dump this in the chat.
Sure, absolutely.
So this so one of the big things under the hood is like the way curve space is operating is it is a fundamentally a 2D game on a 3D surface. And so it is a unwrapped shape. So like this Mobius strip here is unwrapped. And when it's unwrapped, the 2D world space for this is it is non-Euclidean, like it has portals. So it's non-Euclidean in the same way the game Portal is non-Euclidean. Like you can see handling that seam. And once something is in this 2D space, which is also the UV space, very convenient for visualization, you can do some fun things. So for example, the math becomes fairly 2D. Like the laser is just moving it in 2D, and then when you project that back into 3D, it folds and warps and distorts and does all sorts of crazy fun things. But it's fairly straightforward in a 2D logic sort of sense. The other big one is I did a lot of GPU stuff, which you can see in this link, and so there's a whole stack of GPU vector fields that are going on here, and so basically this whole world of vector fields in this rainbow color, that's basically saying how to navigate towards the player. And that's at the heart of the AI. Like I can't use NavMesh in this weird space, but also NavMesh has its issues, and I don't really love the very artificial feel of direct pathfinding. By using kind of this gradient in a forced drag model, spiders flow towards the player. They flow around obstacles. It has a very fluid, organic navigation feel. And then you start taking it further. The nice thing about a pathfinding system is a vector field pathfinding system is it's very cheap to just navigate multiple agents. So then it's like, well, using burst, let's have 100,000 energy particles just drift slightly towards the player. Having 100,000 things move towards the player slightly using NavMesh, that's insanity. But here you actually get some really fun force field sort of physics, and the way the AI moves towards and pushes away, and a lot of the behavior is all done in sort of this vector field space. And then the collisions, I originally used a sort of a 2D collision, but I ended up doing a custom system, basically simple raycasts and circle collisions. And I did that all on Burst. Everything is done using jobs and Burst, just because that was the only way to make this viable on Nintendo Switch. It's funny, when we got the Nintendo license, business head Andrew was just like, "This is awesome! It's a huge validation. This is amazing." 10-year-old Andrew was just kind of like, "Dream since grade 4 is get a game for Nintendo. This is amazing." And programmer had Andrew was screaming a little bit silently, and yeah, for good reason. It was a slideshow on Nintendo Switch, and so I had to reconsider the entire fundamental of how to make this thing work. And yeah, burst jobs came right in time. It was just the basically 2 days after, it's like, okay, this is screwed. Oh, burst just got added support for Nintendo Switch, let's test this out. And I did some initial benchmarking. I set up a whole pile of exponents in a really gross way, just to have it so it was 100 milliseconds a frame, and then run it as a job, 18 milliseconds a frame. So that's good, but that's just multi-threading. It's running it in parallel 5 times on 5 cores. Turn on burst, 0.07 milliseconds a frame. That's a good savings. All of a sudden, it's like, okay, this performance-wise, this is viable, but oh, I need things like raycasts. Oh, those don't exist. You want to touch the outside API? Well, that doesn't exist. You want to touch it? Doesn't exist. So there are a lot of limitations with jobs and burst and some of this bleeding edge stuff, but managed to sort of systematically rethink the algorithms in a way that worked with burst, and was able to actually make it run on Nintendo Switch, and it runs pretty good. It plays well on there.
Gosh, that's incredible. Like I'm literally looking at this, staring at this. I could see the player looping from this end to this end. It's absolutely blowing my mind. I can't believe what I'm looking at. What about you guys on here? Are you getting all this? Are you absorbing all this? So talk to me about having to publish, because you mentioned Switch. You had to do it for Steam and PC, but then there's all these other platforms that you published for. What was the process for like that, and how was it publishing and getting the approval process and everything like that for these different platforms for your game?
It was really interesting. So we tried to get that ourselves under sort of a self-published model, and it was uh, challenging. Xbox was really good. Xbox indie developer program is really nice. They made it really easy. PlayStation, we got approved, but we never got a dev kit or onboarded, and it kind of took forever, and there were some issues there. And Nintendo was they're very, very tough to get connected to. And it's funny, the Nintendo one, I was a speaker at the Reboot Develop Red conference, and the Nintendo guy was supposed to be there, and I was going to try and track him down, and he ended up not being there. But during the conference, I got the email that it's like, hey, this is actually approved. So I don't know if he saw a speaker at this thing, or somehow one at the convention said something or something. I'm not sure, but like, so we ended up getting the Switch and Xbox, and then we'd applied to like GOG and Epic Game Store and those sort of things, and didn't get that. Steam is trivial, but we ended up shifting gears a little bit, just because the marketing was not going great, and we started thinking of the more classic publisher model, and we ended up pitching to a number of publishers. We started talking with Maximum Games / Modus, and we signed a deal with them, and so they unlocked like Series X, PlayStation 5, and made that a lot easier. So that was helpful. But then you get to the actual like development brass tacks of like, okay, now you get to build it, and it was a lot harder than I expected. Like, Unity is modular, but this idea of have Unity, it works on all platforms, is a convenient little fairy tale. And fun things like some of the stuff that just was mind blowing. It's like, oh, if you leave it on the pause screen for 30 seconds or more, it will hard crash a PlayStation 4.
Really?
Why? I have no idea. That fails cert. Why? I have no idea, right? And you start to like track some of these things down, and that ended up being like a thread conflict with Unity's native graphics jobs and the PlayStation like controller heartbeat. and it's like these are non-trivial things to sort of track down. Or some of the memory management stuff on Switch, it's like, yeah, Unity has a pretty cool memory allocation block profiler thing and stuff like that, and even just optimization. Like I talk about burst and things, but like for example, the does object equal none or not none? Does object equal null?
Mhm.
That's pretty straightforward. That seems like it would be cheap. That is slow, very slow. So that classic sort of singleton idea, like just asking audio pool dot instance, oh well, if that audio pool dot instance checks for instance equals null, that was like 2-3% of my performance on Switch.
Wow.
And so like things like that. So there's lots of places where you can like really start changing some of that stuff around and figuring that out. Like things like a for each loop compared to a for loop. Guess what? That for each loop is slow as balls, pardon the language. It's and so like there's all sorts of tricks on the optimization side and tricks in terms of like debugging memory allocations and threading and profiling uh, and then just like weird idiosyncrasies with the platforms, like the Xbox user handling was an experience. You are obligated to maintain the single player user on a controller. That sounds great. Do you think you could ask the console who the dominant user is? Oh no, you have to infer it.
Wow.
And it's crazy. And so that's where we got into with Maximum Games. They provided CQA, so compliance quality assurance, and where they check against all these sort of cert things and that. And it was tricky. It's certainly not trivial. So it's funny, yeah. Andrew, this time last year was just kind of like, oh, we're gonna make it run in Unity. We're gonna make it not run nice and performant, and then we'll just like hook up the different like platforms, and everything will be fine. And then you find out that, oh yeah, no, shaders are radically different on Sony. And it's like, oh, really?
Wow.
So stuff like that is kind of crazy. Um,
So you had no idea what it would in essence look like until you were actually deving it on a PS4 or deving it onto an Xbox.
Oh, yeah, the dev kits are critical, and they've got pretty good forums and support. And like Unity, actually, to their credit, has some dedicated guys to help navigate that. And like the cert requirements are pretty obvious, or not
Mhm.
obvious, pretty well documented.
Mhm.
The only issue is it felt a little bit like, okay, here's a phone book, and then you get a case that's like, what? You didn't adhere to subsection 42 on page 912. How dare you? And it's like, oh, and little things like I had no idea that PlayStation you could actually rescale the screen size for like oversampling on a TV. So if you had anything within the outside border of your frame, like your screen, like a HUD, well,
Mhm.
you immediately fail cert unless you're reading the certain API call and rescaling your HUD around that sort of thing. So it's stuff like that. And it, like now that I'm aware of it, okay, you can plan for that and build around that. But a lot of these things are not trivial and not necessarily obvious. And there's so many of them. It's like it's hard enough to build a game, and then it's to actually like understand the million little sub requirements and idiosyncrasies for each platform. It's yeah, it's tricky. Um,
Oh, that's incredible. So your Steam, your game is out, or I'm sorry, your demo is currently out
oh no, the
and
game's out.
on
It's
sale
launched. It's
and it's
launched.
launched.
If you like what you see,
And
buy it. Buy it. Leave a good review. If you
how,
don't like it, just tell me in person. I'd happily take the feedback. But if you like it, leave a good review.
that's good. Yeah, so how has the overall feedback been so far? Has it been pretty good?
Feedback's been pretty good. I think the what we ended up finding is and this is a side effect of the make the game I want to play,
Mm-hmm.
is I made a game that is very niche.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, the people who like it, they really like it, and that is awesome. It is definitely not a game for everyone, which sucks for the business side,
Right.
but it's a we it does resonate with some people, and I think the other big piece of feedback is it's kind of like it takes something, does it well, and doesn't really give you much beyond that. And well, you know what? As a very small studio, that I think is actually a sign that we picked our battle on scope and we stuck to it and didn't turn into something exploded. So I'd like to think, like for me personally, it's the best form of what I ever wanted Curve Space to be, and I'm pretty happy with that. Sales have been pretty good. If this was Steam only, this would have been a commercial disaster, but thankfully it's doing really nice on consoles, and Maximum Games knows what they're doing there.
Excellent, excellent. Okay, so we're talking to students who are entering the game industry field. They're going through understanding, not only just the basics of game development, but learning everything about Unity. Really focusing hard on C Sharp, understanding C Sharp as a programmer, to take it from not only gaming to beyond gaming. And you have been in both industries. What do you see as like the big difference between both? What advice would you give for somebody who wants to go and become, let's say question a game developer, build their own game? What advice would you give them? And then talking to somebody who wants to get into the beyond gaming industry, what advice would you give to them?
Like from a tech side, dev side, they're the same part of my brain, the same tools. It's slightly different application thereof. Good code is good code in both cases. There's a radically different sort of business side piece. But I do think one of the big pieces of advice I'd have is and like I've been really fortunate to have some awesome mentors through my own career, and I do try and make a point to pay some of that forward. But like I credit a lot of my programming decisions to asking the little Steve Hladke on my shoulder and what he'd approve of this algorithm or this piece of architecture. And he's more angel than demon, I would say. But like I leveled up more working 6 months with Steve than in like 3 years of kind of self-taught brute force programming. And so one of the things I often see is a lot of students kind of like, okay, cool, I graduated from college and now I'm going to hire 20 people to make Final Fantasy and it's going to be a giant commercial success. And I can flat out say it's not. And I do see a lot of the blind leading the blind. Like working on these projects and things is good, but it's being able to work in an environment with a team, with people, with mentors, where you can actually really kind of build those skills and learn is key. And it's both on the technical side, but also like on the business. So like the other one is like games are big and complicated, and there's a reason you have teams in the tens of people. So the idea of like, it's like, I'm going to make this piece of software that's going to disrupt this whole industry. It's like, great. That's a lot of knowledge and political understanding to disrupt the industry, and a lot of knowledge and technical understanding to build the product. And then also, like, let's be honest, a lot of knowledge and artistic understanding to make it look good, and a lot of knowledge and design understanding to make it a positive experience to get your hands on. And so it's like, that's probably not happening by an individual, and that's probably not happening by a junior. So it's finding these niches to work on, and find a team, work in that team is probably the big piece of advice. Although I will counterpoint to some of the other piece that I'll say is, I'm interdisciplinary by trade. I've done a talk on that. I think I was originally titled "Don't Kill Your Unicorns." And so if you do find the multiple hats thing interesting, you do like doing some design and programming, or art and programming, or business and design, or those sort of things, celebrate that, focus on that, do it. It's extra work. Like I've basically done like 3 things that would normally be full-time jobs sort of in parallel. That's not for the faint of heart, but it's awesome to be able to not be pigeonholed in certain spaces and to be able to reach beyond that. So there's a joy in it, but yeah, lots of nuance all around. I'm probably just rambling now at this point, but
No. Now, when it comes to like let's say beyond gaming, like this industry of VR and training, like how big is it? How exciting is, or not exciting, but how much in demand is it from industries, specifically in like simulation, architecture, things like in this nature, the training? Do you see a growth in this area that maybe most game developers never even looked at?
yes, but so it's uh, like on the say VR cranes,
Mhm.
there's kind of like, last I checked, there's sort of like 5 companies globally, and there were like 2 leaders, and they basically had different philosophies on how to approach it, right? So these guys are really entrenched, and it's not an easy thing to go in there, because you're also like you're looking at disrupting an industry, which takes a lot of effort and capability and these sort of pieces. And like, it's not just make a product. You need a product with good um, instructional design. And like, if you have hardware, like I think that the physical hardware, like now you're talking, like you want to sell physical hardware in Europe. Well, you need CE certification. You need the FCC certification. They need to run your product in this kind of like specialized room to measure its electromagnetic interference with various things and all this sort of testing. And it's a that gets very, very, very expensive. So
Mhm.
it's like a like small couple person team. If they control the scope, they can go make an awesome indie game. It's doable. It's
Mhm.
not easy.
Mhm.
There's signal to noise, like there's 30,000 games on Steam. Getting yours noticed is very, very hard, but
Mhm.
it's doable. Going out there and kind of going, it's like, all right, I'm now going to change the way that we train, I don't know, concrete pump truck operation. That's doable, and there may be demand for that, but you're probably going to want to start with $20 million of investment and a whole lot of experience and a team of 20 people. So that's not for the faint of heart to start. And it's nothing is impossible, but yeah, it's not an easy one. And there's also like a lot of the same lessons, like control scope, right? Like in the same way that I wouldn't with two people try and take on a World of Warcraft. It's like I wouldn't recommend like a small team like at Series. We never tried to take on, say, like CAE and the flight sim industry. But
Mhm.
there were places where it's like, oh yeah, you know what, with VR we could do this and this would be a useful place. And there's certainly room. I'm not saying don't get into it, but it's like it also depends on like level of experience and understanding and places, and just navigating the business side is huge. And so a building a game is complex and huge. So it's rare to have both skill sets in one. And like I wouldn't even be comfortable navigating the business side of these. Like I'd be happy working with some of my partners there, but
Mhm.
yeah.
I gotcha. Now, so you've seen a lot of students, and you've probably met a lot of them trying to get hired in at your company that you worked for and you're part of, and you're part owner of, and probably have tried to hook up with you on Curve Space in many ways. Um, what are it, what are the things that they did right and wrong? Like if you see someone coming out who has some training, who is a Unity developer, what are the things that impressed you, and what were the things that you said, yeah, that was the worst thing they could have possibly done?
The one I've seen so many resumes and portfolios and stuff. The one that really gets to me is the kids who know very little. Especially there's certain colleges where it's like they are generalist programs. So in 6 months, they'll teach you programming, animation, modeling, texturing, sculpting, level design, Unity, Unreal, etc. And the end result is they've basically done chapter one of a bunch of books you could buy at the local bookstore. And
Mm-hmm.
then you have that kid go in. It's like, cool, I'm now an industry expert. I want to be making $50 an hour. And it's just like, yeah, good luck.
Yeah.
So that one is a huge turnoff. I think the big one is a willingness to learn. It's funny, I had a discussion with someone a while back, and he's all excited. He's like, through this program, it's like, I got two interns to help. How much do you think? So if I'm a senior developer and I got two interns, how much of a boost do you think that would get percentage wise? And without hesitation, I go -5%. Those interns will be a net negative, and that's fine. I'm happy to take that net negative because I like mentoring and learning. But there is a long ramp up, and it's a so what really excites me is someone who wants to learn, is excited about this, is passionate, and is willing to kind of put in that effort. And then a few years later, now they're big. And like I had a one junior who fresh out of school and some basic ideas, but just passionate and excited. And we started in fairly generic small stuff, but you start to crawl, you start to walk, you start to run. And she ended up being like owning the pillar of our tutorial voiceover system, and set some really nice architecture. And oh, her career is just spectacular. So like it's a yeah, willingness to learn, interest in learning. um the other like flexibility in learning, right? Like that's the big one. I'm hungry to learn, and I'm happy to go out there and see. And it's like, oh, there's a better way that I could do something. And I've got a fairly big personality, and like I'll push back hard, and I can be a bit of a bulldozer. But at the same time, if you show me that here's a better way to do it, I'll be the biggest supporter of that, and I'll learn and I'll understand, and I'm happy to do that. And so finding someone who's closed-minded on something, or not interested in learning, not interested in understanding, just wants to how to do it their way or something, that dislike that as well.
Okay. So you had 20 years of experience in game development. Like, so did you, just refresh my memory? You went to school for CS, correct?
Uh, Bachelor of Industrial Design,
Okay.
with I did the computer science route, so
Mhm.
kind of a comp sci major. I don't think it was technically a comp sci major,
Mhm.
but yeah, Bachelor of Industrial Design, and that really focused on the project centric, thinking about projects, thinking about client requirements, that sort of cycle. Now, a lot of my peers there, like one fellow, he's working at Lego. Another fellow got his master's at Pasadena. I think he's working at Ford. Like we looked at things from sustainability to like mold making and design to like people went into sort of more graphic design, advertising, all over the place. So gaming's kind of a slightly atypical route, but very much the project centric, the project thinking, and the design faculty was right between engineering and like the fine arts. So we had fine arts classes, and we actually like I had programming classes, and I really enjoyed that thinking. So it was about the mode of thinking. Have complained a little bit to directly to faculty on there's so many kids who are interested in doing games, and like I kind of I did it despite the program, where there's like at least 10 of my peers who weren't able to crack the industry with that program, where it's like you got all the right pieces here, you could make a proper game centric route. And I think that's changed in recent years, but
Mhm.
even outside that, it's just thinking of projects. And yeah, so that also speaks to my kind of like, I'm a designer who learned to program more than a programmer who learned design or something like that.
So where did you learn to program then?
Oh, just hacking together mods for Unreal Tournament, then eventually working with guys through Sirius, and eventually like learning architecture and proper development from guys like Steve Latke and stuff like that. So it started sort of self-taught, and then a number of courses at university. Although like I'd already been doing a bunch of the hacking stuff, so like I ended up challenging like CompSci, like the 114, 113 stuff like that.
Okay.
Um, it's funny, they wouldn't let me challenge the one course, so I went to the labs and the exams, and I actually met my wife in one of the labs, which was funny. And I ended up going to the wrong exam, the wrong time slot for the course, and had to kind of beg forgiveness from the prof. But so that kind of, but that was, it's funny in hindsight, like it's like, ooh, challenging this comp sci course, and I felt all good about that. But at the flip side, it's like, yeah, my self-taught modding career of like 3 years was basically equivalent to like an entry level course for an undergrad. But yeah, there you go. So I did take classes like the algorithms and stuff like that, and then but most of it was like learning by doing. Most of my, like I think our average programmer at Sirius had their masters, and so that was actually some pretty nice experience. And eventually, as we got bigger, we had a lot of like former Bioware guys. We had a former Relic fellow, and learn good practices from them. And it's just learning by doing is probably the big one.
Now, did those guys join your team for any particular reason, or other than they wanted to get out of games, or was there just a certain game ended and then they kind of cleared house and everybody else went to different projects, or what was the overall reason for them to switch from gaming to more of a enterprise oriented field?
There was a couple of people there who were kind of I want to do something maybe a little bit more meaningful in a like I want to save lives versus just make something for entertainment fluff. There's a little bit of like AAA fatigue from the crunch practices and political departmental BS that you can start to see. But I think at the end of the day, it's the average person, myself included. It wasn't about industry versus games. It's I'm doing cool real-time experience creation involving like awesome physics simulation for cables.
Mhm.
Okay, is that for a crane sim to teach someone how to get their certification as a crane operator? Or is that for a awesome, fun game involving rope physics? It really doesn't matter. It's about the type of work and just awesome team to work with.
Awesome. Peggy asked, "How did you get a soundtrack?" She noticed it on Steam. There was a soundtrack.
Oh yeah, soundtrack's really good. Check it out.
Sweet.
So the really proud of the soundtrack. So I tend to have music playing in the background while doing development, which is fun. I love that. And it's funny. The music starts to color, and different projects sort of take on a life in terms of the music that I'm listening to, and it's funny. That sounds very similar to we at Reboot Develop Red. Pseudo51 did the keynote, and he came in there and it's like, I'm supposed to do this like big keynote to this like game development conference, and then I said, no, I'm going to throw that away, and instead I'm basically going to show this captive audience my mixtape. It's just like what, and it was surreal and glorious. But it's the same idea. Like basically for each project, he started to develop like a music feel emotional landscape, and with Curve Space I ended up drifting into a lot of the cyberpunk synthwave, dark synth, those sort of things, and it started to color the game to the point where like early tests I'd like put on a YouTube for like Prime Thanatos or Odysseus or something like that in the background, and eventually it's like I need to start thinking actual music for this game. And the first thing I did is like, wow, there's a bunch of these songs that keep popping up that I really like that kind of fit the feel of this, and trace them back. And it's like, I wonder how bad it is to license this thing. And it felt like walking into a Ferrari dealership and like, I like your bright orange automobile. I can totally afford this. Let's talk test drive. But then it's like, wow, I can't actually afford this. That's pretty sweet. So Fixt Neon, Fixt, they have been amazing. So small record label out of the States, they right type of music, amazing, like just an amazing library of yeah, Fixt, yep. So they've been awesome. And so like basically it's like we negotiated a exclusive like all soundtrack from Fixt Neon, which was easy because I could easily have 10 times the music. Like 3-Force is all our boss music. 3-Force are awesome. Scandroid, and so, and they get games. Like last time I had to deal with a record label sort of thing, it was a negotiated the master rights from the artist directly through the artist's agent, and then tried to negotiate the production rights. But because the production rights were jointly held by this company, it went from like Los Angeles to Minneapolis to London back to Los Angeles, and at each step they tried to add like a zero, and it was just a nightmare. Where like with hey, there's Curve Space, hey, and where with Fixt, it's like cool. So you're looking for like a worldwide unlimited, which is basically sound file in game as long as the game exists, right? And like yeah, and they had all that, and they've been amazing to work with. So highly recommend talking to these guys. They're really good with they understand games, and it's I can't get into the specific numbers, but suffice to say it is affordable on indie budgets, and recommend that. And so working with great music, and then folding the music into the game, and like the glowing lines on everything is the Tron lines, and the 80s aesthetic was heavily inspired by the music, and we kind of leaned into that feedback loop. And so I'd like to we look at the feedback, it's like great soundtrack, and it's part of it is just awesome music, and the other part is like really linking that theme to the experience. And oh, it's been fun.
Awesome. And Steve asked, "Are there any C sharp? Any tips on learning C sharp, like what to focus on for games?"
um Very good question. The big one that I would have is understand the fundamentals and be smart about performance, understand allocations, understand just writing basic performant code. Avoid link. Link is slow. I had to rip link out of Curve Space, so just don't use link. Understand caching, understand things like basic profiling, stuff like that. and just like good readable code is kind of the big one. Think about architecture, think about like how to make something in a way that like allows you to understand what's going on, and has some reasonable practices. Like you don't want a bunch of things stepping on just global static variables and tripping over each other. And there's lots of sort of specific sort of cases, but like I would say be very skeptical about any of the Unity update. Anytime you see Unity update in a tutorial, it's like that's a great demonstration piece. That is not how you should write code in Unity. The understand some of the systems that are out there, like input system, and some of these pieces understand shaders are good. Like there's so many different pieces of, like, you're not going to become an expert in every different facet of something like Unity, but like understand what these different pieces are adding. Um, Asset store, like I'm a big fan of buy versus build. If you can find someone, like if someone's already solved the problem better than you're willing to put into it, that's great. Although I went to a great talk by the Kerbal Space Program guys, and they had this wonderful analogy on middleware from the asset store should be treated as a side dish. It should be modular. You can swap out a baked potato for some cauliflower for some garlic bread, right? That's pretty easy. If you're going to incorporate that middleware directly into your core project, it's going to basically be like adding seasoning. And don't do that lightly, because it's, you can't take salt out of soup very easily. And then he showed a picture, this awesome stock footage picture of this sad woman looking at a pot of soup, like, and it's like, see this woman, she's sad because she has engui in her soup. And it was perfect. From back in the engui days.
Back in the NGUI days. That's a
Yeah.
serious reference right there.
Yeah, and it's like I got that. I totally got that. So that was yeah, but the middleware, but the other side of that is like there's so much cool stuff out there in Unity, especially, that like I see a lot of people, it's kind of like, I'm just going to go write my own version of each of these things, and how much time are you able to invest? But then the other flip side on the buy side is like you look at Steam and it is overwhelmed with here is Unity platformer template, the game number 510, right? And that's not going to make any money from a business side either. And like it's complicated. The other big one I would just say on a personal level is a uh, really consider, what does success look like? That's the fundamental question anyone can ask themselves. And like Unity is really interesting because I've seen both the hobby side and the business side, and both are fine. Like if your interest is as a hobbyist, no problem in that at all. If you want to spend a week learning motion capture, if you want to spend a week learning shaders and all this, like more power to you. I respect that. That'll be good value. But then there's the other side. If your goal is to set this up as a business and to make money, well, that's a very different approach. And that's where you want to have a very lean, specific hook. You want to make sure you can have something visually polished, functionally polished, that you're thinking about pitching, that you're thinking about marketing and all of these pieces. And like I've seen so many people out there where it's just, I'm going to dabble around, and business plan is one day put it on Steam, and well, it's not going to pay the bills, right? And
Right.
likewise, I've seen people focus so heavily on the business one where it's like all you really wanted to do is just have fun with this, and you killed the joy. So it's complicated, and I don't think everyone has everyone's going to have different answers. But the what does success look like for the project, for yourself personally, for the business, and very very good question to keep asking yourself.
Very cool. All right, guys. Well, it looks like if you are interested, go ahead and get yourself a copy of Curve Space minus Mohammed. Mohammed doesn't have to worry about that. And everyone else, you check it out. This has been incredible, Andrew. Thank you so much for being a part of this. Um,
Oh, happy to be here and share, and oh, I I could talk for hours on any of these things, but
is there anything that you could leave us with? Any last words? Any advice? Any conversation that you can give us before we sign out of here?
there's so much. The general one I would say is the persistence pays off better than kind of binges. So like I've seen a few people who do the kind of like, I'm just going to do like a breathless weekend where I don't sleep every now and then, and you know what works better for moving a project forward is an hour a day or half an hour a day. And Curve Space for a while was like I'd do the first 2 hours of my day. I'd set the alarm early, woke up, worked on that, and then head downtown and work Serious. And that consistent push really helped in addition to Fridays. So consistency can be really good. And then the other side specific to Unity, because this is very Unity centric. I love Unity. I love how flexible Unity is. And I have seen so many projects just eviscerate themselves on that edge. And it an interesting contrast. So a little story that I have is back in the day with Serious, we worked with Unreal 2, then Unreal 3, and we switched from Unreal 3 to Unity just before Unity 4, and mostly around platforms and platform support. And we needed some morph targets, and like Unreal, morph targets have been standard for years, right? Unity, it's like, how does Unity not support morph targets? Like this is insane, right? And then it's like, oh, there's like 10 options on the asset store. There's 3 open source ones, and here's a tutorial on how to roll your own in an afternoon. So I ended up just rolling my own in an afternoon. And what's crazy is like we had done a similar scale modification of like low level mesh data on Unreal, and it took our like super senior AAA programmer like 3 weeks and $10,000 budget sort of thing, right? So it was almost impossible to change stuff like that in Unreal, but in Unity it was trivial. And that really speaks to like Unity's hyper flexibility, and it's amazing. But and like it's great for rapid prototyping and all these things, but if you can do something 10 different ways, and you have a project where you have each person on the project like solves the same problem 10 different ways, it is a unsustainable tangle of garbage. It's awful. And so you often see people are like, Unreal is very difficult to learn, but then it's amazing once you get it up and running. And then Unity is super flexible, but it's almost impossible to finish a Unity game. And one of the big issues in finishing a Unity game is like that flexibility just turns into a complexity explosion. And so what we did for Serious and what I did for Curve Space and every other project I've worked on is you use that flexibility to basically pick a direction, set yourself a structure, and then you use that structure with discipline, like we did for Unreal. And that was truly the best of both worlds. And it's funny how much you want to subvert that. It'd just be slightly easier if I did it this way, or that Serious, all the designers were like, well, if we just got this visual scripting thing, then I don't need to use your objective thing, or I don't need to get a programmer to modify the system to allow me to open a door here. And it's like, yeah, you're also asking for a system that now has logic that is outside of the standard program flow and is going to make something very difficult to debug and all these things. And so that discipline and structure is huge. That consistency is huge. And then you start getting some fun dividends on that, like the if everything's done through the same system. Well, now you can tool that. Now you can make assumptions on the testing. You can do automated tests. You can do some really powerful things. Like we had 80 hours of unique playable content for Crane. And it's like, how is it possible to regression test all of that? And like, well, if I have 50 scenarios and literally the only difference between 50 scenarios is a spline, well, I can be pretty sure that if 3 of them are working randomly and they all pass an automated overnight test, that they're generally in good shape. So there's a lot of structure value in structure. So I think the biggest Unity specific tip I'd give is, yeah, enjoy the flexibility, but use the flexibility to find a path that you can then use with discipline.
Awesome. Thank you so much. This was awesome. Thank you so incredibly much.